The alien ship flew through space like a silver arrow cutting through the darkness. The three beings inside had no idea. Their perfect day of research would soon become a fight for their lives. Dr. Vexstar pressed his crystal hands against the control panel, watching the readings with growing worry. His tall, transparent body shimmered with nervous energy as the ship's systems began to fail one by one. Engineer Kilara used all four of her scaly arms to work on different panels at the same time. Her reptile eyes darted between screens, showing red warning lights everywhere. The ship was falling apart around them, and nothing she tried seemed to work. The power core was overheating, the navigation system was dead, and the hull was cracking. Under pressure they had never felt before. Behind them, botanist Zeppelin floated in her special tank of breathing fluid that kept her jellyfish body alive. Her tentacles moved in patterns that showed pure terror. She had studied plants on hundreds of worlds, but had never seen readings like these. The scanners showed that the planet below them was covered in toxic chemicals and deadly radiation that could kill them in minutes. The ship had been flying perfectly just 1 hour ago. They were supposed to collect simple plant samples from the outer edge of this solar system. It should have been easy work for the Galactic Science Consortium, but something had gone terribly wrong. Their ship's computer had picked up strange signals from the planet below, and when Dr. Vexstar tried to investigate, the whole system crashed. Now they were falling toward a world that their instruments said was impossible. Any planet with this much poison should be completely dead, yet their sensors showed massive structures on the surface. The readings made no sense, but they had no time to figure out what was happening. The ship was burning up as it hit the thick, toxic atmosphere. Akela shouted over the screaming metal hull that they had maybe 10 minutes before impact. She had managed to get the emergency systems working, but barely. The ship was falling too fast, and she could not slow it down enough. Dr. Vexstar tried to steer toward what looked like a flat area, but the controls were not responding properly anymore. The three aliens strapped themselves in and prepared for the worst kind of landing. Zeppelin sent out distress signals on every frequency, hoping someone would hear them, but they all knew no rescue ships came to this part of space. This region was marked as a dead zone on all the charts, where nothing valuable existed and no civilized species ever traveled. The ship hit the ground with a sound like thunder and bounced 3 times before sliding to a stop. In a cloud of dust and smoke, the hull was cracked in dozen places, and toxic air was already leaking inside. Their environmental suits automatically sealed, but the power indicators showed they had maybe 6 hours of life support left. Dr. Vexstar unbuckled himself with shaking hands and looked around at the destruction. Most of their equipment was broken and sparking. The main computer was completely dead, and the communication array had been torn off during the crash they were trapped on. A poison world with no way to call for help and no way to survive. More than a few Horskilara crawled over to check on Zeppelin, whose tank had cracked during impact. She was alive, but her breathing fluid was leaking out slowly. They needed to find shelter and find it fast. The radiation outside was already affecting their instruments, and the toxic air would eat through their suits if they stayed outside too long. Through the broken viewports, they could see the strangest landscape any of them had ever encountered. The ground was covered with metallic objects that looked like crushed cubes stacked in enormous piles. Strange geometric shapes rose up like mountains made of compressed metal and plastic. As far as they could see, there were towers of what looked like garbage from 1,000 different worlds. Dr. Vexstar tried to make sense of what he was seeing. His people were scientists and explorers who had visited hundreds of worlds, but nothing in their databases explained this place. The metallic cubes looked like compressed waste materials, but who would dump garbage on an entire planet? And why would anyone build such massive disposal sites in this remote system? Kilara was checking their emergency supplies when she suddenly froze and pointed toward the main viewport. A figure was moving between the metal piles, walking toward their crashed ship. The being looked small and primitive, with only 2 arms and 2 legs covered in simple cloth materials. Dr. Vexstar activated the external scanners and got readings that made no sense. The creature outside was breathing the toxic atmosphere without any protection at all. Its feet were touching the poisonous ground that would burn through their military-grade boots in seconds, yet it moved normally, like it was walking through a pleasant garden. Figure came closer, and they could see it was some kind of mammal with smooth skin and dark hair. It walked upright like many intelligent species, but its technology level seemed incredibly low. The clothes looked handmade, and it carried tools that appeared to be salvaged from scrap metal. Zephyrin pulsed with amazement as she realized what they were looking at. The databases showed this type of creature. They were humans, a species their people considered barely intelligent enough for simple labor work. Humans were used in the outer colonies for mining and construction jobs that required strong backs rather than smart minds, but this human was doing something impossible. It was surviving on a world that should kill any organic life within hours. The radiation levels outside would cook most species alive in minutes. Yet this primitive creature was walking around like it was perfectly safe. The toxic air would dissolve the lung tissue of advanced beings instantly, yet the human was breathing it freely. Dr. Vexstar watched as the human approached their ship and began examining the damage. It moved with purpose and intelligence, studying the hull cracks and checking the broken systems. The way it looked at their technology suggested it understood more than their databases said humans could understand. The human noticed them watching through the viewport and raised one hand in what seemed like a greeting gesture. It spoke, but the words were in some primitive language they did not recognize. However, when it heard them talking inside the ship, it switched to broken Galactic Standard, the common language used by most space-traveling species. The words were simple and poorly pronounced, but the meaning was clear. The human was offering to help them. It pointed toward the metal structures in the distance and made gestures suggesting shelter and safety. The three aliens looked at each other in disbelief. Their own advanced technology was failing them, but this primitive creature claimed it could keep them alive. Dr. Vexstar made the decision that would change everything for all of them. He activated the external speakers and told the human they would follow it. They had no other choice. Their life support was running out. Their ship was destroyed, and they were trapped on a world that wanted to kill them. As they prepared to leave their ruined vessel, the human waited patiently. Outside, it had no protective gear, no advanced technology, and no backup systems, yet it was the only living thing that seemed comfortable in this nightmare landscape. The irony was not lost on the three scientists that their survival now depended on a species they had always considered inferior. The human gestured for them to follow and began walking toward the metal mountains. Dr. Vexstar, Kalara, and Zephyrin stepped out of their crashed ship and into a toxic world that would test everything they thought they knew about intelligent survival and what it really meant to be civilized. The human led them deeper into the metal landscape, and with each step the three aliens saw more impossible things. The geometric shapes they thought were natural formations were actually compressed cubes of garbage stacked hundreds of feet high. Each cube contained waste materials from dozens of different civilizations that Dr. Vexstar recognized from his travels. The human moved between these towering piles of trash like he knew every path and shortcut. His name was Deho, they learned. When he pointed to himself and spoke slowly, he had been living here for 2 years after his own ship crashed on this world. The way he said it made it sound like living here was normal instead of completely impossible. Dr. Vexstar felt sick as he realized what this place really was. His own people, the Crystalline Empire, had been dumping their industrial waste here for over 300 years. Every broken machine, every toxic chemical, every piece of garbage that advanced civilizations did not want anymore got shipped to this remote planet, and forgotten Killa recognized pieces of technology from her homeworld, compressed into cubes and stacked like building blocks. The irony hit her like a physical blow. They were members of advanced species who had created this nightmare world by treating it like a cosmic garbage dump. Now they needed help from a human who was living among the waste they had created. Aho stopped beside a particularly large cube and began pulling items from inside it. He showed them pieces of biofoam that had been thrown away because it was slightly damaged. When mixed with certain metallic compounds from scrap starships, the foam created breathable air pockets. He demonstrated by placing a small piece in a container and adding metal shavings. The reaction was fascinating to watch. The biofoam expanded and began processing the toxic air around them within minutes. It was producing clean oxygen that their suits detected as safe to breathe. Zephyrin was amazed because her people had developed that biofoam technology but had never discovered it could work this way. when combined with waste metalls, Deho led them to patches of thick green moss growing in areas where different types of alien garbage had been mixed together. The moss looked simple, but when he explained through drawings and gestures, they realized it was doing something incredible. It was filtering the toxic atmosphere and converting it into breathable air. For most oxygen-based life forms, the human had spent 2 years studying these simple organisms that grew wild among the garbage. He had learned which types of moss absorbed different toxins and which ones released specific gases. By combining different varieties, he could create custom atmospheres for different species. He had essentially turned toxic waste into a life support system. Dar Vextar watched in fascination as Deho showed them his shelter built entirely from materials that advanced civilizations had thrown away. Broken force field generators that were considered worthless because of minor glitches worked perfectly when their functions were simplified. The human had figured out how to bypass the complex safety systems that made them stop working. Environmental control units that had been discarded for small malfunctions were running his entire base. They had been thrown away because fixing them would cost more than buying new ones, but Deho had combined parts from dozens of broken units to create systems that worked better than the original Skilla. Realized that everything she knew about proper engineering was wrong. The human ignored safety protocols, mixed incompatible technologies, and created solutions that should not work according to established science, yet his improvised systems were more reliable than military-grade equipment built by the most advanced species in the galaxy. The shelter itself was a masterpiece of creative engineering. Walls made from compressed waste cubes provided perfect insulation against radiation and temperature changes. Power came from broken reactors that had been rewired to work together safely. Lighting came from bioluminescent organisms that Deho had cultivated from discarded genetic materials. Evelyn floated closer to examine the living lights and could not believe what she was seeing. The human had taken genetic waste from laboratories across the galaxy and somehow made it grow into useful organisms. These creatures provided light, heat, and even basic computational functions through their neural networks. He had built a living computer from organic garbage. The most amazing part was how everything worked together. The toxic chemicals that made this planet deadly were being used as nutrients for specially adapted plants. Those plants produced breathable atmosphere and clean water. The waste heat from broken machines powered biological systems that cleaned and recycled everything. Dr. Vextar had to sit down as the full implications hit him. This human had solved waste management problems that had plagued the galaxy for thousands of years. He was not just surviving among the garbage. He was transforming it into resources, creating a sustainable cycle that actually improved the environment around him. Deho noticed their amazement and began showing them more of his discoveries. He had found that certain combinations of industrial waste created perfect growing conditions for food plants. Other mixtures produced materials stronger than the metal alloys used in starship construction. Everything that civilized species threw away was useful if you knew how to combine it properly. The human had turned this death world into a garden by understanding connections that advanced science had never discovered. He saw potential where others saw only waste. He found solutions where others saw only problems. And he had done it all with materials that their own people had considered worthless garbage. As they walked through his improvised facility, the 3 aliens began to understand that their rescue was about more than just surviving. Until help arrived, they were witnessing something that could revolutionize how their entire civilization approached resource management, environmental adaptation, and technological development. Killer realized that human engineering was not primitive, it was revolutionary. Instead of building perfect systems that failed when anything went wrong, humans built adaptable systems that could be repaired and modified with whatever materials were available. It was crude by galactic standards, but infinitely more practical. Flynn saw that the ecosystem Deho had created was more sophisticated than anything her people had developed in centuries of botanical research. He had not just adapted to the hostile environment, he had transformed it into something that supported life. The simple organisms he cultivated worked together in ways that her advanced theories said were impossible. Dr. Vextar felt his worldview cracking as he watched this primitive human demonstrate knowledge that their greatest scientists had never imagined. The databases said humans were barely intelligent enough for manual labor, yet here was proof that human intelligence worked in ways that advanced species had never learned to value as. The toxic sun set over the garbage mountains in Deho lit his biological lights. The three aliens realized they were not just being rescued by a primitive creature, they were being taught by someone whose understanding of survival, adaptation, and resourcefulness far exceeded anything their advanced civilizations had achieved. The human had shown them that intelligence was not about having the most advanced technology or the most complex theories. It was about seeing solutions where others saw problems, finding connections where others saw chaos, and never giving up when others would simply accept defeat tomorrow. They would learn even more about what it really meant to be intelligent in a universe full of impossible challenges. The three aliens woke up in Deho's shelter to the sound of him already working outside. Their life support systems showed less than 3 hours remaining, and panic started to set in Dr. Vextar's crystal body was flickering with stress patterns, while Kilara's forearms shook as she checked their failing equipment. Zephelin's jellyfish form had turned pale with fear, but Deho seemed completely calm as he began gathering materials from the garbage piles around them. He moved with the confidence of someone who had faced impossible situations before and found ways to survive. The human was building something new, and the aliens watched in fascination as he worked. First, he selected specific pieces of broken machinery from different cubes. His eyes seemed to see things that their advanced scanners missed. He picked up a damaged atmospheric processor that Kilara recognized from her own homeworld. The unit had been thrown away because it could only clean air at 60% efficiency instead of the required 90%. Deho connected the broken processor to parts from a medical waste treatment system that Dr. Vextar knew had been discarded because it was too slow for hospital use. The human ignored the warning labels and safety protocols that said these systems should never be combined. He just focused on making them work together. Next, he gathered different types of moss from areas around the shelter. Zephelin watched carefully as he explained through drawings and simple words how each variety served different purposes. Some moss absorbed specific toxins from the air, while others released pure oxygen. Some varieties provided insulation against radiation, while others actually converted harmful energy into useful heat. The botanist was amazed at the human's knowledge of these simple organisms. Her people had catalogs of millions of plant species from across the galaxy, but they had never studied the humble moss that grew in garbage dumps. Deho knew more about these basic life forms than entire university departments dedicated to botanical research. Dr. Vextar felt his scientific training rebel against what he was seeing. The human was violating every principle of proper engineering. The atmospheric processor was being connected to systems it was never designed to work with safety. Interlocks were being bypassed, power requirements were being ignored, and the whole setup looked like it should explode at any moment. But somehow, everything worked perfectly. The improvised air cleaning system was processing the toxic atmosphere faster than their military-grade equipment ever had. The moss filtration added another layer of purification that made the air cleaner than what they breathed on their homeworlds. The temperature control system kept them comfortable. Using waste heat from broken Mashnaskilla found herself learning from every move Deho made. When their primary life support unit finally died completely, the human had already built a replacement that worked better than the original. The new system used discarded medical equipment, broken water recyclers, and a damaged entertainment system's power core. The combination should have been impossible. Medical equipment was designed for sterile environments. Water recyclers needed specific pressure systems. Entertainment systems were never meant to provide life support, yet Deho had found ways to make them all work together, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. As the emergency shelter took shape around them, the aliens realized they were witnessing something their advanced education had never prepared them for. The human was not following any engineering textbook or scientific procedure. He was improvising solutions based on understanding how things actually worked rather than how they were supposed to work. Cephalin helped gather more moss varieties and began to understand the complex ecosystem Deho had created. Every plant served multiple purposes in ways that violated botanical theory. Some moss absorbed nitrogen while releasing oxygen, but also provided structural support for other plants that filtered different chemicals. The interactions were more sophisticated than anything in academic literature. Dr. Vextar started taking notes as he watched. The humans solved problem after problem with creative combinations of waste materials. When their communication equipment failed, Deho built a replacement using parts from a broken toy, a damaged scanner, and some crystalline waste from Dr. Vextar's own people. The new communicator worked on frequencies their original equipment could never access. The most impressive part was how quickly everything came together. Within hours, they had gone from dying in a crashed ship to living comfortably in a shelter that provided everything they needed. The air was clean, the temperature was perfect, and they even had working lights and communication systems. Skilla realized that human engineering was not about building perfect systems that lasted forever. It was about building adaptable systems that could be modified, repaired, and improved, using whatever materials were available. When something broke, humans did not throw it away and buy a replacement. They fixed it, made it better, and found new ways to use it. The shelter was living proof of this philosophy. Every component had been salvaged from garbage, but together they created something more reliable than the most expensive technology their civilizations could produce. The human had turned waste into resources, failure into opportunity, and disaster into triumph. As evening approached and their original life support finally died completely, the three aliens felt something they had not expected to feel on this death world. They felt safe. The humans' improvised systems were working perfectly, providing everything they needed to survive and even thrive in conditions that should have killed them. Deho showed them how to maintain the systems he had built using simple tools and basic techniques. Everything was designed to be repaired by anyone with basic intelligence. No special training was required, no rare materials were needed, and no complex procedures had to be followed exactly. Dr. Vextar felt his understanding of intelligence expanding as he learned from the human. Their civilization valued complexity, precision, and perfection, but Deho's approach valued adaptability, creativity, and practical results. His methods were simple enough for anyone to learn, but powerful enough to solve problems that defeated advanced technologically. Discovered that the Moss ecosystem was more than just air purification. It was a complete life support system that recycled everything, produced food, and even generated building materials. The human had created a closed-loop system that got better over time instead of wearing out like manufactured equipment. As they settled in for their first night of safety since the crash, the three aliens began to understand that they were not just being rescued. They were being educated in ways of thinking that their advanced civilizations had forgotten or never learned. The human was showing them that true intelligence was not about having the best technology, but about making the best use of whatever you had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they learned more about surviving on this impossible world, but tonight they could rest knowing that human creativity and determination had given them something their own advanced science could not provide. They had hope. The morning brought terrible news that made all three aliens panic at once. Deho pointed to the horizon where dark clouds were building and explained through urgent gestures that a massive storm was coming. The humans' broken words in galactic standard painted a picture of electromagnetic chaos that would destroy any remaining technology. They had. Dr. Vextar checked his instruments and felt his crystal body go cold with fear. The approaching storm system was generating electromagnetic pulses strong enough to shut down military-grade equipment. Their delicate alien technology would be completely fried within hours. Everything they had managed to salvage from their ship would become useless metal and plastic. Alara tried desperately to shield their remaining devices using techniques she had learned in engineering school, but nothing she tried seemed adequate for the massive energy readings approaching them. The storm was unlike anything in their databases, a phenomenon that their advanced science had never encountered or prepared for, but Deho seemed almost excited about the coming electromagnetic chaos. He led them around his shelter, pointing out modifications he had made specifically for this type of weather. The human had designed his entire survival system to not just survive these storms, but to actually benefit from them. The aliens watched in amazement as Deho activated systems they had not noticed before. Metallic waste had been arranged in specific patterns around the shelter, creating a network that would absorb and redirect the electromagnetic energy instead of being destroyed by it. The same forces that would kill their technology would power his improvised system. Zeppelin observed as the human tended to strange glowing organisms he had cultivated in special containers. These creatures looked like nothing in any biological database, but they pulsed with their own light and seemed to respond to electromagnetic fields when Daeho touched them. They glowed brighter and displayed patterns that looked almost like circuit boards. Dr. Vextar realized with shock that the human had created living computers from organic waste. The bioluminescent creatures were actually processing information through their neural networks. They could perform calculations, store data, and even communicate with each other through light patterns that resembled advanced programming code. As the storm grew closer, the wind began to howl with a sound like screaming metal. Toxic particles filled the air in concentrations that should have been instantly lethal to any organic life. But Daeho moved freely throughout the shelter, checking systems and making adjustments without any protective gear. At all, the human explained through increasingly detailed drawings that certain types of metallic waste, when properly arranged, would absorb and neutralize radiation. The very toxins that made this planet deadly became protective shields when understood and manipulated correctly. He had turned the environment's greatest threats into his most valuable. Rizorskilla felt her worldview cracking as she watched Daeho prepare for conditions that would kill most space travelers. The human was not just surviving impossible circumstances, he was thriving in them. The storm that terrified her was just another day of weather for him. When the storm finally hit, it was worse than anything the aliens had imagined. Lightning filled with electromagnetic energy struck, constantly turning the sky into a web of crackling power. The toxic wind carried particles that would dissolve most metals, and the radiation levels spiked beyond anything their instruments could measure. Their high-tech rescue beacon died immediately, along with most of their remaining equipment. The advanced devices they had depended on for survival became expensive paperweights in minutes. Everything their civilizations had taught them about technology seemed useless in the face of this raw natural power. But Daeho's primitive systems came alive during the storm. The metallic waste arrays began glowing as they absorbed electromagnetic energy and channeled it through organic circuits that converted chaos into useful power. The bioluminescent organisms brightened and began processing information faster than quantum computers. Dr. Vextar watched in fascination as the living computers displayed complex calculations, showing weather patterns, resource locations, and system status reports. The human had created a biological internet that used electromagnetic storms as power sources instead of being destroyed by them. The shelter itself seemed to grow stronger during the storm. Walls made from compressed garbage absorbed radiation and converted it into structural integrity. The more hostile the environment became, the more secure their refuge felt. It was engineering that worked backwards from everything the aliens had been taught. Cephalin discovered that the moss filtration system actually improved during electromagnetic storms. The chaotic energy caused the plants to process toxins faster and produce cleaner air. The storm that should have poisoned them was instead purifying their environment beyond anything possible with manufactured equipment. As hours passed and the storm raged outside, the three aliens began to understand that they were witnessing something revolutionary. The human had not just adapted to this hostile world, he had formed a partnership with it. The very forces that made the planet deadly were being transformed into. Alice Galar found herself learning principles of engineering that her teachers had never imagined. Instead of fighting against natural forces, Daeho worked with them. Instead of trying to control the environment, he had learned to dance with it. The results were systems that got stronger under stress instead of weaker. When the storm finally began to weaken, the aliens emerged to find their rescue beacon completely destroyed by electromagnetic interference. They were now completely cut off from their own civilizations, with no way to call for help. Their advanced technology lay in ruins around them, but they also discovered something amazing. The storm had revealed new deposits of useful materials that Daeho could use to expand their shelter. The electromagnetic chaos had also charged his biological systems with enough power to last for months. The disaster that should have killed them had instead made them stronger. Dr. Vextar realized that this was the key to human survival philosophy. Humans did not try to build perfect systems that never failed. Instead, they built adaptive systems that could turn failure into opportunity. They did not fear chaos, they learned to use it. The human began salvaging materials from their destroyed equipment, showing them how broken alien technology could be combined with garbage to create even better systems. Their military-grade computer became part of a biological network that was more powerful than the original. Their destroyed communicator provided components for a broadcasting system that could reach across star systems as night fell, and the electromagnetic aurora painted the toxic sky in brilliant colors. The three aliens sat in their shelter, powered by storm energy, and realized they had learned something more valuable than any rescue could provide. They had learned to see the universe through human eyes. Tomorrow they would continue learning from their primitive teacher, but tonight they understood that human intelligence was not about having perfect knowledge. It was about having perfect adaptability, the ability to turn any situation, no matter how hopeless, into an opportunity for growth and survival. The storm had tested everything they thought they knew about technology, survival, and intelligence, and in passing that test, they had discovered that sometimes the most advanced civilizations had the most to learn from the most primitive ones. Weeks passed as the three aliens recovered their strength and learned more each day from their human teacher. Deho had become their guide into a completely different way of thinking about survival technology and what it meant to be intelligent. The lessons they learned changed everything they thought they knew about their own advanced civilizations. Dr. Vextar spent his days documenting everything he observed as the human transformed waste into resources. He realized that Deho had solved problems that had plagued the galaxy for thousands of years. The waste management crisis that threatened dozens of worlds could be solved using techniques the human had developed from pure necessity. The crystal scientist watched as Deho turned toxic industrial chemicals into plant nutrients. Broken machinery became building materials. Radioactive waste was converted into power sources. Everything that advanced civilizations threw away because it was dangerous or useless became valuable in the human's hands. What amazed Dr. Vextar most was how sustainable everything was. The human had created a cycle where waste from one process became fuel for another. Nothing was ever truly discarded because everything had multiple uses that most people never discovered. The garbage dump was slowly becoming a garden that cleaned itself while producing everything needed for life. Kilara worked alongside Deho every day, expanding their shelter into a proper facility. She learned that human engineering focused on completely different principles than what she had studied in the most advanced technical schools in the galaxy. Her people built systems to be perfect, efficient, and specialized for single purposes, but human systems were designed to be adaptable, redundant, and capable of serving multiple functions. Every component had backup uses, every process had alternate pathways, and everything could be repaired or replaced using materials that were always available. It was crude by galactic standards, but infinitely more practical for real-world conditions. The engineer discovered that human technology got better over time. Instead of wearing out, Deho's systems improved themselves as he learned more about how they worked, modified them to handle new challenges, and integrated better materials as he found them. The shelter that had started as emergency protection was becoming a sophisticated facility that rivaled anything built by her. Evelyn spent her time cataloging the incredible ecosystem Deho had cultivated from organic waste. The human had created plants that should not exist, animals adapted from discarded genetic material, and microscopic organisms that processed waste faster than the most advanced recycling technology. The botanist was amazed to discover that many of the organisms were actually improved versions of species that had been thrown away by research laboratories across the galaxy. Genetic experiments that had been considered failures were thriving in ways their creators never imagined when properly integrated into living ecosystems. Ho had done more than just cultivate waste organisms. He had created complex relationships between different species, where each one supported and enhanced the others. Toxic chemicals became nutrients. Plants produced materials that fed animals. Animals created compounds that helped plants grow better. The whole system was alive and intelligent in ways that challenged everything Zephyrin knew about ecology. As the weeks turned into months, the three aliens began to understand that their education was about more than just survival techniques. They were learning a completely different philosophy of existence that could revolutionize how their civilizations approached every challenge they faced. Dr. Vextar realized that the human approach to problem solving could solve crises that threatened entire star systems instead of trying to control natural forces. Deho worked with them. Instead of fighting against chaos, he learned to direct it. Instead of fearing the unknown, he explored it until it became useful. The crystal scientist began to see connections between human thinking and problems his own people faced. Their homeworld was running out of resources because they kept building perfect systems that eventually broke down and had to be replaced. The human approach would create systems that renewed themselves indefinitely. Discovered that human engineering principles could transform how starships were built. Instead of making vessels that needed expensive repairs at specialized facilities, every component could be designed to be fixable with common materials. Every system could have multiple backup functions, and everything could be upgraded over time. The engineers started designing modifications to their shelter that combined alien precision with human adaptability. The results were systems that were more reliable than either approach could achieve alone. The partnership between human creativity and alien knowledge was producing innovations that neither species had imagined possible. Zephyrin found that the ecosystem principles Deho had developed could restore dead worlds across the galaxy. Planets that had been written off as permanently damaged could be brought back to life, using techniques the human had discovered. The key was working with existing conditions instead of trying to impose artificial solutions. As they worked together, the barriers between species began to disappear. The aliens learned to think like humans, seeing opportunity in every disaster and potential in every piece of waste. Meanwhile, Deho learned from their scientific knowledge, combining human intuition with alien precision to create solutions none of them could have developed alone. Dr. Vextar started to understand that intelligence was not about having access to the most advanced technology or the most complete databases. It was about being able to adapt to any situation, find connections between seemingly unrelated things, and never give up when faced with impossible challenges. Skilla realized that the best engineering came from understanding how things actually worked in real conditions, rather than how they were supposed to work in perfect laboratories. Human systems succeeded because they were designed to handle imperfection, uncertainty, and constant changes. Zephyrin discovered that the most sophisticated biological systems were often the simplest ones that had been allowed to develop natural relationships with their environment. Instead of trying to control every variable, it was better to create conditions where beneficial relationships could evolve naturally. The three aliens began to see their own civilizations differently. Their advanced technology was actually quite primitive because it could only work under carefully controlled conditions. Human technology was truly advanced because it could work anywhere, adapt to anything, and improve itself over time. As they shared meals made from plants, Deho had grown in toxic soil and discussed ideas using concepts from multiple species. The aliens realized they were participating in something historic. They were witnessing the birth of a new kind of science that combined the best insights from different ways of thinking. Dr. Vextar knew that his reports would shock the scientific community when he eventually returned home. The implications of what they were learning would force every advanced civilization to reconsider their assumptions about intelligence, technology, and what it meant to be civilized. Killa understood that human engineering principles would revolutionize how the galaxy approached construction, manufacturing, and resource management. The techniques they were developing could solve shortages that had plagued spacefaring civilizations for centuries. Eshiflin realized that the ecological restoration methods they were perfecting could bring life back to thousands of dead worlds, turning the galaxy's greatest disasters into its most productive resources. The same principles could also prevent environmental collapse on worlds that were still healthy. As another toxic sunset painted the sky over their thriving settlement, the three aliens reflected on how much they had changed. They had come here as representatives of advanced civilizations, looking down on primitive humans. Now they understood that they were students learning from a teacher whose wisdom far exceeded anything their schools had provided. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries as they continued exploring the endless possibilities that emerged when different forms of intelligence worked together. But tonight they knew they had found something more valuable than rescue. They had found a new way of understanding what it meant to be truly intelligent in a universe full of challenges. Months had passed when a bright light appeared on the horizon, moving with the unmistakable signature of an advanced starship. The rescue vessel had finally arrived, drawn by signals from communication equipment that Deho had helped them repair. Using salvaged components and biological amplifiers, the three aliens watched the ship approach with mixed emotions. Vextar felt his crystal body pulse with conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to return to his comfortable laboratory on the homeworld, where everything was clean, predictable, and safe. But another part of him knew that leaving now would mean abandoning the most important research of his entire career. The principles he had learned here could change how his entire civilization approached science. The rescue ship landed near their thriving settlement, and the crew emerged wearing full environmental suits that made them look clumsy and fragile compared to Deho, who walked freely in the toxic atmosphere. The rescue team was amazed to find the three scientists not just alive but healthier than when they had left home. Captain Velanara of the rescue vessel was a fellow crystal being who commanded one of the most advanced ships in the galactic fleet. She had expected to find survivors barely clinging to life in makeshift shelters. Instead, she discovered a sophisticated facility that was more comfortable than most space stations. The captain listened with growing disbelief as Dr. Vextar explained what they had learned from their human companion. She saw the biological computers, the living air purification systems, and the incredible ecosystem that had been created from waste materials. But her military training made it hard for her to accept that such primitive methods could be superior to advanced technology. Dr. Vextar faced the most difficult decision of his life. His research here was just beginning, and there were thousands of discoveries still waiting to be made. The techniques Deho had developed could solve resource shortages that plagued dozens of worlds. The waste management principles alone could revolutionize galactic civilization. But Captain Velanara brought urgent messages from the Crystal Empire. They needed his expertise. For a crisis on the homeworld, industrial waste was poisoning entire continents, and traditional cleanup methods were failing. The government wanted him to return immediately to lead a planetary restoration project. Dr. Vextar considered his options. He realized that the choice was not between staying or leaving, it was between thinking small or thinking big. The principles he had learned from Deho were too important to keep on one world. They needed to be shared with every civilization that faced environmental challenges. He made his decision carefully. Dr. Vextar would send detailed research data with the rescue ship along with samples of the most promising biological systems, but he would remain on the waste world to continue his studies. The real work was just beginning, and he could not abandon it now. Kilara faced pressure from multiple sources. Her corporate sponsors wanted her to return immediately and begin implementing human techniques in their industrial processes. The potential profits from human engineering principles could make her company the wealthiest in the galaxy. But Kilara understood that the real value was not in copying human methods, but in learning human thinking, the mindset that saw opportunity in every disaster and potential in every piece of waste could not be packaged and sold. It had to be learned through experience and practice. She chose to establish a permanent research station that would bring together the best minds from multiple species to study human adaptability. The facility would serve as a bridge between human creativity and alien knowledge, producing innovations that neither approach could achieve alone. Corporate executives would be angry about her decision, but Kilara knew that the long-term benefits would far exceed any short-term profits. The engineering principles they were developing here would eventually transform how every civilization built, maintained, and improved their technology. Botanist Zephyrin received the most urgent summons of all. Her homeworld was facing ecological collapse as industrial pollution overwhelmed natural systems. Entire ocean ecosystems were dying, and traditional restoration efforts were making the problems Worse, the planetary government wanted her to return immediately with any solutions she had discovered. They were prepared to implement whatever techniques she recommended regardless of cost. The desperation in their messages made it clear that her people were facing extinction within Decades. Flynn knew that the ecosystem restoration methods she had learned from Deho could save her homeworld and dozens of others. But she also knew that these techniques could not be simply transplanted from one environment to another. Each world would need customized solutions based on its unique conditions. She decided to create a training program that would teach other botanists how to think like Deho rather than just copy his methods. The principles of working with existing conditions instead of imposing artificial solutions would need to be adapted to each specific environment. The rescue ship would carry her most promising students back to threatened worlds where they could begin restoration projects using human-inspired techniques, but Zephyrin herself would remain to continue developing new approaches that could handle even more challenging environmental disasters. Captain Velanara was amazed by the decisions all three scientists had made. She had expected them to be desperate for rescue. Instead, they were turning down immediate return to their homeworlds in favor of continuing their research on a garbage dump planet as she prepared her ship for departure with reports that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Captain Velanara began to understand what had happened to her fellow scientists. They had not just survived their ordeal, they had been transformed by it. The reports they were sending would force every advanced species to reconsider their assumptions about intelligence, technology, and what it meant to be civilized. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species would be officially recognized not as subjects to be exploited, but as teachers whose wisdom could benefit every Anadejo. Watched the rescue ship depart carrying messages that would change how humanity was viewed across the galaxy. He had started as a crash survivor trying to stay alive on a hostile world. Now he was the center of a revolution in thinking that would spread to star systems. He had never heard of the three alien scientists continued their work alongside their human teacher, transforming the waste world into a living laboratory where the impossible became routine. Their success sent a powerful message across the galaxy that intelligence was not about having the most advanced technology, but about making the best use of whatever resources were available. As years passed, their research station grew into a thriving community where beings from dozens of species came to learn human approaches to problem solving. The techniques developed there spread throughout civilized space, solving crises that had seemed impossible to address. Dr. Vextar's waste recycling methods restored dead worlds and solved resource shortages. Kilara's adaptive engineering principles revolutionized how starships and space stations were built. Zephyrin's ecological restoration techniques brought life back to planets that had been given up for lost. But the most important discovery was not any specific technique or technology. It was the realization that true intelligence came from being able to adapt to any situation, find connections between seemingly unrelated things, and never give up when faced with impossible challenges. The human ability to see potential where others saw only problems, to create solutions from materials others considered worthless, and to build hope from the wreckage of despair became the foundation for a new approach to science and civilization. Their success proved that in a universe full of challenges, the most valuable resource was not advanced technology or superior firepower, it was the willingness to learn from anyone who had found ways to survive and thrive, no matter how primitive their methods might appear. The waste world that had once been a symbol of civilized indifference became a beacon of hope, showing that with the right mindset, any disaster could be transformed into an opportunity for growth, and any challenge could become a chance to discover new possibilities.